Howdy friendos, welcome in. Let's talk about making the jump from professional to nightmare. First, we'll talk about the main differences between settings, besides the obvious jump from 3 evidence to 2 evidence. Sanity pull restoration goes from 30% down to 25%. The grace period goes from 3 seconds to 2 seconds. So the grace period is the time between like the front door locks, the ghost initiates the hunt, to when it can start moving around and actually killing you. So you do lose 1 second, it's not that noticeable. The number of hiding places goes from medium to low, and you lose access to the sanity monitor and activity monitor. So the biggest differences are definitely going to be losing that one piece of evidence and not being able to see where your sanity is at. As far as sanity goes, you can usually maintain your sanity by staying in the light and avoiding getting hit by ghost events. And the more you play on Nightmare, the more you'll get a feel for where your sanity might be at. You're like, okay, I've been in the dark for a few minutes, might have dropped by about 10% sanity. Oh, I got hit by a ghost event, there's another 10% sanity. And if at any point you're worried your sanity might be low enough to where the ghost could hunt, just have a crucifix in the ghost room, or where you're going to be hanging out, and or have an incense and lighter on you. I do have a whole guide on how to survive ghost hunts. I can link that down below. We're not going to talk about that a whole lot in this video. I thought what would be the most helpful is going through all the evidence combinations and talking about how to test for those. Going from professional to nightmare, you are going to be required to know ghost hidden abilities and be comfortable with the ghost hunting. So let's go and hop into how I would test for each ghost depending on what evidence combinations I have. So say I was in a game where I get EMF and UV. With these options, this is going to be the first time I talk about forced evidence. Goryo has dots as forced evidence. What that means is that if you're playing on difficulty with evidence, one of the Goryo's evidence has to be dots. So in this example, we have EMF 5 and UV. That does not include dots, so automatically we can cross off Goryo because dots is not included. That'll leave us left with Jin, Obake, and Myling. Now, if at any point during the contract the ghost is turned off the breaker, you could cross off Jin. A rather niche way to test for Jin is to have EMF reader at the breaker. When the Jin uses its ability to drain your sanity by 25%, it will leave an EMF reading at the breaker. However, you have to be both near the ghost to get it to use its ability and close enough to the breaker to see this EMF reading. So I personally don't use this test, but if you happen to have a ghost, like say I bet a potential Jin, ghost room's right here, you could throw an EMF reader on the breaker and see if you get a random EMF reading here. And because Jins use their ability and drain your sanity by 25%, if you have a ghost that feels like it hunts early and your evidence is EMF 5 and UV, could potentially be a Jin using its ability, lowering your sanity to 50%, which is the Jin's hunting threshold, allowing it to hunt. As far as Obake goes, you could be checking anytime it touches a door or a window to see if you get the 6-fingered Obake fingerprint. And for Myling, as far as like out of hunt tests go, Myling's the only ghost that can give you 2 paranormal sounds and or sound recordings within 80 seconds of each other. Now, all of these tests aren't like super helpful depending on your situation. They're just other ways you can test for them outside of a hunt. So let's go and talk about how we test for them during a hunt. For Jin, you're looking for a ghost that's normal speed, but the second it rounds the quarter and sees you, it gets an instant pop in a step, kind of like this. And of course, you have to have the breaker on for the Jin to be able to do this speed up. So if you're in this situation, ghost normal speed, you stand up or let it see you, it doesn't get an instant pep in its step, not a Jin. For Obake, you'd have to loop the ghost or at least get along enough visual to see if the ghost ever shapeshifts. Obake's, if they're the male ghost model, they'll shapeshift between the different male ghost models. If it's a female ghost model, it'll shapeshift between the different female ghost models. I get asked a lot of questions about the crawling ghosts. If you have a ghost, say like the pajama girl or the demon child, and she's crawling one hunt, but then the next hunt she's standing, that is not an Obake shapeshift. That's just what they do. However, within the same hunt, if you see one of those ghosts go from crawling to standing, that is an Obake shapeshift. And when Mylings are hunting, they are super quiet. So an easy way to test for them is to find a hiding spot, put a flashlight down at your feet, and if you hear the footsteps before your flashlight starts flickering, then it's not a Myling. But if you only hear the footsteps when your flashlight starts flickering, it is a Myling. And you have to make sure you're doing this test on the same floor as the ghost. Okay, now for the next set of evidence, EMF 5 and ghost writing. We've already talked about how to test for Myling. Spirit, you will have to use an incense on them. They're the only ghost that has to wait 3 minutes to hunt after you use an incense. Now, you have to make sure that your sanity is low enough for them to be able to hunt. A spirit's hunting threshold is 50%. A nightmare, we can't check that, but you can either initiate a hunt with a cursed item, making sure that it drains your sanity low enough so that it could be able to hunt the next time, or if it just hunts naturally, you could then use an incense on it. You don't have to use the incense during a hunt. You could do it in between hunts. You just have to make sure you're like in the same room. So like put down a motion sensor. If the motion sensor goes off, use the incense, start a timer, or if the ghost event's on you, you can use an incense then. I personally like using the timer LiveSplit. It's free to download on PC. And I always start the timer as soon as I use the incense. Now, some ghosts like waiting 3 minutes to hunt for literally no reason after using incense. You might have to do a couple incense timers if you aren't sure, but I also don't blame you if you leave a spirit if the first incense timer is 3 minutes. As far as shade goes, their incense timer is 90 seconds. So if you already cross off miling because the ghost is too loud, and you have an incense timer going, if the ghost then hunts between 90 seconds and 3 minutes, then it's going to be a shade. Alternatively, shades are super inactive ghosts, especially if you're in the same room as them, and they also aren't able to hunt until 35% sanity. So if you're hanging out in the same room as the ghost, you know your sanity is probably pretty low, it's not doing anything, it's not hunting, shade's going to hunt the same room as you, then it could likely be a shade. Shades also cannot do singing ghost events, so if you have a ghost do the ring around the rosy singing ghost event, it cannot be a shade. There's a couple of ghost events that are kind of like humming. Those are not singing ghost events. So to tell between these two, it's going to be an incense timer. If you have an incense timer going and it could be a shade, make sure you're not in the ghost room because that'll keep them from hunting. Or if you're hanging out at the ghost room, you know your sanity is like rock bottom 0. Ghost isn't hunting, probably a shade. Now for our next set of evidence, EMF 5 and freezing, we have Jinn, Shade, Oni, Twins. We've already talked about Jinn, we've already talked about Shade. So let's talk about Oni and Twins. Oni is the only ghost that cannot do the airball ghost event, so if you have this evidence, or just at any game really, if you get an airball ghost event, you can immediately cross off Oni. However, if you haven't gotten a ghost event, you will have to get a visual of the ghost and look at their blink. Onis are the most visible ghosts when they're hunting, and their blink will look like this. What helped me a lot with figuring out Onis is getting familiar with what a normal blink looks like. That way when I do see an Oni, I'm like, something just clicks in my brain. I'm like, okay, that ghost is very visible. It's gotta be an Oni. For Twins, and when they're hunting, you just have to listen to their speed. So you don't even have to like loop. You could hide and just listen to them. They're either gonna sound 15% slower than normal or 15% faster than normal. Now again, that can be hard to tell. For me, I just got really familiar with what normal ghost speed. Normal ghost speed matches up to the song, "This is the Rhythm of the Night." A couple other songs too. Alternatively, Twins do what is known as a twin interaction, where they'll do 2 throws but in separate areas. So if you're sitting there and you hear 2 objects get thrown in different areas close by, could be a twin interaction. Twins will also have like their main ghost room where you get most of their evidence. But if they have the decoy twin doing most of the action, then they'll likely be doing activity in a different room. Freezing can be especially difficult to get against twins because they're roaming so much. So don't get too frustrated if you're having a hard time getting freezing in this situation. It's pretty normal. Now for our next set of evidence, EMF 5 and dots, we have Wraith, Oni, Goryo, Raiju. We've already talked about Oni. Let's talk about Wraith. So Wraith is the only ghost that when they walk over salt, whether it's during a hunt, whether it's during a ghost event, or if you just have it in their ghost room, they will not disturb the salt. So if you put down salt in the ghost room, or during a hunt, the ghost walks over and disturbs it, you can cross off Wraith. However, if you see them walk over the salt, it does not get disturbed. You have a motion sensor on the salt, it activates, salt does not get disturbed, then it is a Wraith. Wraith also has an ability where it'll TP to a player, and when it does this, it'll give a random EMF 2 or EMF 5 if that's one of their evidence. So another way to test for Wraith, but it's definitely a lot quicker just to put down salt and see if the ghost disturbs it. Now the really only tell for Goryo is that 1, they will never change their favorite room. They can roam up to 4 meters outside of that room. They can also ghost event outside the room, so if a ghost events outside the room, don't immediately cross off Goryo. They can do that. You can also only see Goryo dots through a video camera when you're outside of the room. If you ever see dots in person, you can immediately cross off Goryo. So to see the dots, you have to sit just outside the room with a video camera, or set up a video camera and sit outside in the van and look for dots. This can sometimes take forever. It's just part of the Goryo's charm. It can definitely be easier to tell in person though, because you can have the video camera out, kind of look at both the room and the video camera, and see if you only see the dots in the camera lens. Also, when you're doing this, make sure that all your teammates are outside the room, because you won't get dots otherwise. For Raiju, their hunting threshold is actually 65% sanity when they're near active electronics. So if you have this evidence, the ghost hunts a little bit early, could potentially be a Raiju. They also get faster around active electronics, so if they're normal speed, but then they go by a motion sensor or something, they instantly get faster, probably a Raiju. Right now, I'll mention this, but it could get changed by the time you watch this. Raijus have a super bass boosted heartbeat, and this happens even when they're eventing. So if you have a ghost event, its heartbeat is basically breaking your eardrums, probably a Raiju. Now there are 2 sets of evidence that will do this for you. This is being one of them, EMF 5 and Orbs. This will automatically tell you what the ghost is. Raiju. Because Obake has forced UV. So if you get EMF 5 ghost orbs, it's just automatically a Raiju. And then for EMF 5 and Spirit Box, we've already talked about these ghosts. So 3 minute smudge timer, whether or not it disturbs salt, and listen to its speed. Now let's talk about UV and ghost writing. We've already talked about miling, so we won't talk about that. As far as poltergeist goes, outside of the hunt, they're the only ghosts that can throw something with the light being on their room. That's because they're actually using their ability to throw this object. So you can turn the light on the room and see if the ghost throws something. You have to be a little careful with this because ghosts can sometimes throw things through the walls, so they could technically be in a dark room throwing something, but it's being thrown in the lit room. So if you have the lights on in the general area and it's throwing stuff, it could potentially be a poltergeist. You can also make a polty pile of items in the room, and if the ghost is a poltergeist, it will explode this pile. Just be careful because it'll drain your sanity a bunch when it explodes this pile of items, so make sure you have a crucifix nearby or have an escape route and an incense on hand. While poltergeists are hunting, they will throw something every half second. So if you're not getting a poltergeist explosion, it hasn't thrown anything with the lights being on, you can get the ghost to hunt and then loop them around a surface where you put a bunch of items. Poltergeists will throw things like crazy. My rule of thumb for poltergeist is if I'm looping a ghost and I'm doubting if it's a poltergeist or not, it's probably not. Because when you actually get a poltergeist and see how much it throws stuff, you'll be like, why did I ever think any other ghost was a poltergeist? And as far as demon goes, demon is the only ghost that can hunt at any sanity when it uses its ability. You could potentially walk into a game if the ghost is a demon and it'll hunt instantly. This doesn't always happen, but it could happen. Otherwise, their hunting threshold is 70%. A couple tells for demon are 1, they can hunt 60 seconds after using incense on them. 2, they have an increased crucifix range. It's an extra 50% depending on what crucifix you have. So for example, with tier 3, it's typically a 5 meter range. It would be a 7.5 meter range against demons. And then 3, demons only have a hunt cooldown of 20 seconds, whereas other ghosts have to wait at least 25 seconds between hunts. They don't always do this, but you could potentially, if you're out of incense, you haven't somehow gotten the between 60 second and 9 second smudge timer. Sorry, I use the term smudge and incense interchangeably because incense used to be called smudges. But for some reason you haven't gotten the between 60 and 90 second smudge timer, you could time to time in between hunts and see if you get a hunt cooldown of between 20 and 25 seconds. And sometimes you get lazy demons. They don't hunt very frequently, which could be a good thing. But hopefully in this scenario, when you can't tell if it's a poltergeist or a demon, you get a demon that gives you a 60 second to 90 second incense timer. Okay, now let's talk about UV and freezing. We've already talked about demon and jinn. So let's talk about Hantu. Hantu is another ghost that has forced evidence, which is freezing. So in this situation, we do have freezing, so Hantu is definitely still an option. We also have Mimic on the table. I'll go and talk about this now. Mimic also has forced evidence being ghost orbs. No matter what difficulty you play on, even 0 evidence, a Mimic will have ghost orbs. So if you have this situation, you've crossed off demon and jinn, look in the ghost room for orbs. Mimic will be the only ghost on Nightmare that will have 3 evidence. So it'll be some combination of ghost orbs, UV freezing, maybe ghost orbs spirit box, or maybe ghost orbs UV spirit box. So anytime you get some combination of UV spirit box or freezing, make sure you're always double checking for orbs because it could be a Mimic. Well, let's go back to Hantu for a second. So the way Hantu works whenever it's hunting is its speed is dependent on how hot or cold a room is. It'll be faster in a cold room and slower in warm rooms. So if the ghost hunts, it's super duper fast coming out of its ghost room where it's colder, but then it slows down going through the rest of the house where it's warmer, then probably Hantu. Hantus also don't have gradual line of sight speed up, so if you're in a warm room, you're looping a ghost, it's slow, it's also not gradually getting faster and faster, probably a Hantu. Hantus will also have visible breath while they're hunting if the breaker is turned off. Now as far as Mimic goes, besides the evidence is going to be the easiest way to tell for Mimic on Nightmare, but if you have a ghost that is one hunt, a Diogen, and the next hunt, it's a Revenant, probably a Mimic. Mimic can mimic basically any ghost behavior in the game as long as it has the evidence for the ability that's mimicking. For example, it doesn't have dots as evidence, so it could never give you Goryo dots. And on Nightmare, in this example, say if this is our evidence, you cannot be able to get the Diogen growl because it doesn't have Spirit Box as its evidence. But you could get the Obake 6-finger fingerprint if it mimics an Obake. Hopefully that makes sense. Mimics can be a little bit complicated, but on Nightmare, just look for the 3 evidence. Okay, now as far as UV and dots goes, for Goryo, we've already talked about them, but you would only see the dots through the video camera. So if you saw the dots in person, you can immediately cross off Goryo. The main difference between Banshee and Phantom is that 1, if you take a picture or video of the ghost and it disappears, then it's going to be a Phantom. If you take a picture or video of the ghost and it's clearly in the photo, then it's not going to be a Phantom. Alternatively, when the ghost hunts, if it's a Phantom, it's going to have a very, very long blink. It's going to be hard to see. And the Phantom has an ability where it'll pick a player at random and roam to them. And when it does that, it'll give you a random EMF 2 reading. Now for Banshee, whenever you start a contract, it's going to pick a player at random and that's going to be their favorite person. They'll follow them around outside of a hunt, like they'll stalk them. And whenever they start hunting, as long as that player is inside the house, that is the only player they're able to kill. So if you're playing in a 4-man group, the ghost starts hunting, it's a Banshee. The target is safely hiding. Everyone else can walk around freely and not have to worry about dying. Now, however, you do have to get a hunt initially, and see who the target is, take turns trying to get aggro, and just make sure that player is safely hiding, and you can basically walk around freely while the ghost is hunting. However, if the target walks outside of the house and the ghost starts hunting, the Banshee will hunt normally and kill anybody. Or if the target dies, the Banshee will then select a new target. You can also get the Banshee Scream on either the Paramic or the sound recorder. There's like 20 different Banshee Screams. You can check out the Phasmophobia wiki to hear what they all sound like. So if you're in single player, you don't have the luxury of everyone taking turns to see what the target is, and you're testing for Banshee. And what I would do is just get the ghost to hunt and see if it's visible or not, how visible it is. If it has a phantom blink, obviously it's a phantom. If it's visible, then it's a Banshee. And now let's talk about UV and orbs. I'll go and talk really quick. If you have this combination, you do have to worry about Mimic. You will then need to either look for freezing or spirit box. But if you know for sure you don't have either of those, in this situation you could cross off Hantu because you do not have freezing. Remember, freezing is forced evidence for Hantu. And at this point, you either could be checking for the 6-fingered fingerprint for a Bake, you could be listening for Banshee Scream, or if you don't want to wait for that, you could get the ghost to hunt and see if you see a shapeshift. If you don't see a shapeshift, then it's a Banshee. And if you do see a shapeshift, then it's no Bake. And then if you get UV and Spirit Box, we've already talked about all these ghosts. You look for the blink, see how visible it is. If it's not very visible, has a very long blink, it's a phantom. Look to see how much it's throwing or make a pulti pile. And then for Mimic, you would just look for ghost orbs. If there are no ghost orbs in the room, sometimes you gotta be a little bit thorough because they can be sneaky, then it can't be a Mimic. Now let's talk about ghost writing and freezing. So we've already talked about Shade and Demon. In this situation, you actually could cross off Moroi because Moroi is another ghost that has Spirit Box as forced evidence. So if you have this situation, it automatically just can't be a Moroi because there is no Spirit Box. But if you're an example where you don't have these like crossed off yet, obviously, for Revenant, whenever it goes to hunt, it's going to be extremely slow. However, if you were to see a player or detect their voice or equipment, it's going to get very, very fast. And then if you were to get away or use an incense to get away, it'll gradually slow back down. All right, now let's talk about ghost writing and dots. This is the second scenario where if you get these two pieces of evidence, it's just automatically a Fae. Because Deogen has forced Spirit Box. So again, it was EMF and Orbs, automatically a Raiju. Ghost writing dots, automatically a Fae. Alright, now onto ghost writing and Orbs. We've already talked about Revenant, so let's talk about Mare. Mare is the only ghost unable to turn on a light. So if you're in a game, the ghost turns on a light, you can cross off Mare. Mares can hunt at 60% sanity in the dark, but have to wait until 40% sanity to hunt in the light. Mares also have an ability where they can turn a light off immediately after a player turns it on, but this can be a little misleading because there's scenarios where you may go to turn a light on at the same point another ghost is going to turn a light on, so it can look like a Mare ability. So be a little careful, maybe wait for 2 Mare abilities, or if you're pretty sure it's a Mare, you might be able to trust it. As far as Thae goes, the way they work is that when you first start a contract, the Thae will be young. It's the only ghost that actually like ages throughout the game, and it ages if there's a player nearby it. Every minute or two, if there's somebody nearby, it'll age and get older. Meaning, if it were to hunt right away where it's young, it's going to be fast. An unaged Thae has a hunting threshold of 75%. So if you don't find the ghost quickly enough, sanity gets down to 75%, a Thae could hunt. But if you progressively age it, it'll gradually get slower and slower each hunt. And also lower its sanity hunting threshold. If you happen to be in a game where you have a Ouija board, you can ask the ghost what its age is, hang around the ghost for a little bit. If it is a Thae, potentially age it, and then go ask the Ouija board again, how old are you? And the age should go up. So if I was in this situation, I got my evidence, I would probably get the ghost to hunt, and just based off of these 3 ghosts, you could just hide and listen to the speed. Depending on how long the game's been, if it's been a pretty quick game, a Thae would probably still be pretty fast. A Revenant is going to be very, very slow, and then a Mare would be normal speed. However, if you've been in the game for a while, you could have potentially aged the Thae. If you know it's not super duper slow like a Revenant, you'd probably have to, and it sounds normal speed, you might have to loop the ghost and see if they gradually get faster and faster, because a Thae will stay the same speed while it's hunting. It won't gradually get faster and faster as it's chasing you, whereas a Mare would. So hopefully you don't get that scenario where you've aged a Thae perfectly to where it sounds normal speed, but if you're worried you might have, I would definitely try to get aggro of the ghost and see if it gets any gradual line of sight speed up. Okay, now let's talk about ghost writing and Spirit Box. We've already talked about these 3 ghosts. So let's talk about Moroi and Dio. They have the requirement of having Spirit Box, which they both have 4 Spirit Boxes evidence. The way the Moroi works is that if you get a Spirit Box response, a sound recording response, or a parabolic mic response, you will then be cursed. What this means is that your sanity is going to drain twice as fast, even if you're in the light. So if you get a Spirit Box response, and it seems like the ghost hunts pretty early, like you haven't been in the dark, you haven't been hit by any ghost events, and the ghost hunts, could potentially be Moroi and you've been cursed. Moroi's speed is dependent on how high or low your sanity is, So 0% sanity Moroi is going to be pretty fast. I think it's around like 30% sanity. Morois almost sound normal speed. And then around 50% sanity, they're going to kind of sound like the slow twin. If you're unsure if the ghost is a Moroi or not, you can hide while the ghost is hunting and take sanity pills. And the idea is that you take the sanity pills and your sanity slowly starts rising. And if it were a Moroi, you would actually hear its speed gradually slow down. Now, as far as Dio goes, a lot of people are pretty familiar with how Deogens work, so I won't talk about them long. But when they do hunt, their sanity hunting threshold is 40%. They do take a while to hunt, but when they do hunt, they know where everybody is at all times, so you cannot hide from them. They'll be super duper fast getting to you, but then be extremely slow. So if you are hiding, the ghost is very fast. All of a sudden it's outside of your closet, super duper slow. I hope you have an incense on you to use and get out of the hiding spot, because it's a Dio. However, they're super easy to loop, so if you're caught in the open against a Dio, as long as you're not backed up in a corner, just go somewhere where you can go around in a circle and you should have a great time. Deogens also have a unique spirit box response, the Dio growl. It sounds like this. However, to get this response, you have to be right on top of the ghost. So I usually pair this with a motion sensor. I'll put a motion sensor in the room, and then when motion sensor activates, I'll ask the ghost where is it. And this is a sound that you can record on the sound recorder. All right, now let's talk about freezing and dots. We've already talked about Oni, and in this scenario, you either have to get the ghost to hunt to see how visible it is, and then if it's very, very visible, it'll be an Oni. If it has normal blank, it's a Yuri. However, if you've been playing this game and you happen to get a ghost to touch a door, this could tell you whether or not it's a Yuri. The only interaction a Yuri can do with a door is to fully open or fully close it. So if you're playing a contract and a ghost slightly moves a door, it cannot be a Yuri. However, if the only interactions you've seen from this ghost is it fully opening a door and fully closing a door, then it's probably Yuri. Every ghost can fully close a door now, so when I'm trying to test for Yuri, I usually test with the door closed, because it's a lot more obvious the ghost fully opens it. You don't have to worry about it. Oh, was that just any ghost, shutting the door? Because it's a door opening. And keep in mind too, that when the Yuri uses its ability, it will drain your sanity by 15%. They don't always drain your sanity when they fully open or fully close the door, but they can. So in this situation, either get the ghost to hunt, look at the blink, or throughout the contract, be paying attention to doors and see if they slightly move a door, you can cross off Yuri, or if they only fully open or fully close doors. Also, if you get an air ball during this contract, obviously you can cross off Oni. All right, let's talk about freezing and orbs. This is another scenario we would have to check for Mimic. So you'd have to check for either UV or Spirit Box, but if you're sure you don't have either of those, then these are the ghosts you're left with. We've already talked about this, and this, so let's talk about Onryo. Onryo's normal hunting threshold is 60%. However, that is lowered to 40% if it's nearby firelight. They can hunt at any sanity if they blow out 3 firelight. This doesn't have to be like 3 firelight back to back to back, it's just 3 firelight in general. And the tier 2 firelight with the 3 candles does not count as 3 firelight. That is still just 1 firelight. However, when you're doing this test, the 3 blowout test for the Onryo, make sure you don't have any other firelight nearby, because if it blows out the 3rd firelight, that would cause it to hunt. If there's another firelight right there, that 4th firelight will keep it from hunting. So I usually just do this test with like 1 lantern or 1 candle. Alternatively, Onryos are not able to hunt within 4 meters of a lit flame. So another way to test for them is to take a firelight and a crucifix and see if the ghost is willing to use the crucifix by the firelight. If they happily use the crucifix by the firelight, then it cannot be the Onryo. However, if they are continuously blowing out the firelight and are unable to use the crucifix, then likely an Onryo. You have to be a little careful if you're using the tier 3 crucifix, because it has a 5-meter range, whereas the lanterns only prevent Onryos from hunting within 4 meters. So if I'm using a tier 3 crucifix, I usually have 2 lanterns or 2 candles nearby to properly test this. And sometimes Onryos still find a small pixel of the crucifix to use, but generally if I have 2 firelight, I can tell whether or not it's an Onryo. Onryo is also the only ghost able to blow out the same firelight within 20 seconds. So if the ghost blows up the firelight, you relight it, and then it almost instantly blows it back out, then it's going to be an Onryo. All right, now let's talk about freezing and Spirit Box. This is another situation where you have to look for Mimic, but in this scenario, you would just look for Ghost Orbs. If there's no Ghost Orbs, then you don't have to worry about Mimic. And we've already talked about these ghosts, so you would just listen to speed. You have to be a little careful here between Moroi and twins, because depending on what your sanity is at, it could sound like the fast twin or it could sound like the slow twin. So you might want to use the sanity pill restoration trick to see if it slows down while it's hunting after you take the sanity pills. But if your average group sanity, or if you're playing solo, your sanity is pretty much 0, a Moroi is going to sound very, very fast. So in this situation, you could get the ghost to hunt and listen to its speed. Or before you do that, you could put down a crucifix with some firelight and see if the ghost is able to use the crucifix by the firelight. Now let's talk about dots and orbs. I think we've just about talked about every one of these ghosts except for yokai. So yokais are hard of hearing. They can only hear you within 2.5 meters. of them. They also can hunt at 80% sanity if there's a player nearby talking.
Hello, ghost. Do you want to hunt us? Oh.
I think they do. So if you're in a group of people, you're in the ghost room, you're talking to each other, and the ghost starts hunting, and it feels pretty early, it could potentially be a yokai. But if this hasn't happened, how I test for yokai is, depending on what map I'm on, if I'm on Willow, I'll just hide behind the kitchen island, use my walkie-talkie, and try to yell at the ghost. If the ghost walks right on by, my radio is staticking, it's not hearing me, then it's probably yokai. However, my radio is staticking and it beeline straight to me, then probably not a yokai. You just gotta be a little bit careful, because sometimes you get unlucky and yokais are pathing to you. They aren't actually hearing you, they're just like, oh, I'm gonna go in the kitchen, where it just happens to be where yokai testing. So I might try this yokai test a couple times just to be sure. On Willow Street, you can actually hide behind the double doors of the living room. You can still see the ghost, but the ghost can't see you. So it's a really good spot test for yokai. Now let's talk about Orbs and Spirit Box. We've basically, I think, just about covered every ghost in the game now. But if you're in this situation, I would put down salt, see if the ghost disturbs it. If you've gotten a picture or video, whether or not the ghost disappeared in those, or get them to hunt and look at the blink, see how visible or not visible it is. For yokai, again, hide somewhere, kitchen island or like in a room, preferably near a hiding spot in case it isn't a yokai, and yell at them with your radio, see if they find you. If they do find you, not a yokai. If they don't find you, probably a yokai. Then Dio, very obvious because of its speed, super fast, knows where you are, but then it'll be really slow. And I do believe this is our last piece of evidence, Ghost Orbs and Spirit Box. In this situation, I would probably set up a crucifix with firelight in the room and see if the ghost is willing to use the crucifix by the firelight. If it is willing to use the crucifix, that is, it's not an on-rail, but if it's refusing to use the crucifix, maybe wandering away from the firelight altogether and hunting somewhere else, could potentially be an on-rail. I would alternatively turn the lights on in the area, see if the ghost maybe hunted before when it was dark, but now is refusing to hunt with the lights on, could potentially be a mare. And obviously if the ghost is turned on a light at any point in that game, it can't be a mare. And alternatively, you could yokai test. Alright, well I do believe we have covered just about every evidence combination there is. Hopefully I didn't miss any. Now I know that the jump from professional to nightmare can seem intimidating, but personally it's my favorite default difficulty to play on. It's a great stepping stone to start learning all of the ghost hidden abilities. It's a perfect combination of looking for evidence, but also having to use like your detective skills to look at the ghost abilities. But I do believe that's all I have for you on this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment them down below. I'm happy to answer any of them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If you found yourself enjoying the video or found it helpful, drop the video a like, and you subscribe. Good luck ghost hunting, and I will see you in the next one.